Disasters don't just happen. They're triggered by a chain of critical events. Unravel the fateful decisions in those final seconds from disaster. Europe, Italy, Tesoro, July 19th, 1985. The peaceful village of Tesoro lies in the Stava Valley. Its idyllic surroundings make it a popular vacation spot. Today, visitors and locals alike are out enjoying the sunshine. 12:10 p.m. Umberto and Clemente de Florian are helping their father Lucio with his carpentry business.
It was a typical summer's day. I was 15 years old, and me and my brother were going to do some work for our family business, owned by my father.
They load their van and head up Stava Valley Road. 12:15 p.m. Back in Tesoro, Alma Treadle is home from work, serving the lunch that her mother prepared for the family.
That day I came back. The table was laid. Everything was ready to eat.
12:20 p.m. 20-year-old Lucia Morandini is helping her father Mario in his sports shop.
That day I thought that seeing as a new supply of stock had just arrived, I'd choose a present for my father because it was his birthday in a couple of days' time.
It's a perfect day in the Southern Alps. But further up the mountain, there is something that makes the Stava Valley far from normal. Since the discovery of rich mineral deposits in the 16th century, Prestival Mountain has been mined. Local residents coexist with the mining companies who work the mountain for fluorite, a valuable chemical substance. Extracting fluorite from mountain rock produces large amounts of waste material in the form of sand and water, known in mining as tailings. It's also the name given to the massive dams where the tailings are filtered off and collected. There are two of these tailings dams in the Stava Valley, one built above the other. 12:22 p.m. Umberto, Clemente, and their father Lucio are driving up the road from Tesoro straight towards the dams.
I remember that my father was singing because the next day was the 25th anniversary of the Tesoro Choir.
In town, Alma Treadle and her family are enjoying their lunch at the kitchen table. And in their sports shop, Lucio Morandini thinks she has found the perfect present for her father.
We went to the storeroom. We opened the boxes and took out all the clothes. There was a nice tracksuit that I wanted him to try on.
Over the years, the 100-foot-high tailings dams have become part of the scenery. Obscured by a dense pine forest, they are largely ignored by the locals.
We all knew the dams were there, but we never imagined there would be the slightest danger.
Today, all that will change. (12:22 and 55 seconds). Without warning, the dam bursts. At first, no one knows what it is.
I saw the smoke on the horizon and I asked him, "What's that?" It really looks like a fire.
At 12:23 and 25 seconds, more than 60 million gallons of mud, sand, and water from the two dams course down the valley. The town of Tesero is less than 3 miles away and directly in its path.
We heard a huge noise. We thought it was roadworks.
At 12:23 and 45 seconds, the colossal mudslide hurtles into the small town of Stava, where more than 100 hotel guests are having lunch. In an instant, they are all killed. Traveling at 55 miles per hour, the mudslide now races towards Umberto, Clemente, and Lucio de Florian.
My father didn't waste a second.
He said, "Get out quickly and get up the slope."
12:24 and 45 seconds. The wave of mud continues on its path of destruction. Next in line, Tesero. It's lunchtime in the Italian mountain town of Tesero. A peaceful afternoon, but none of the 2,500 inhabitants know that a massive mudslide is surging towards them. Just north of town, it has already destroyed the van belonging to Clemente, Umberto, and Lucio de Florian. At 12:25 p.m., the mudslide engulfs Tesero. Alma Treadle is at home having lunch with her 4-year-old son Marco, her husband Stefano, and her mother Maria when she hears a rumbling noise.
I hadn't quite leaned over the balcony when I saw what was coming down the road.
Seconds later, more than 65 million gallons of mud hits Alma Street, destroying 17 of its 25 houses. Further down the street, Lucia Morandini is working in the sports shop with her father.
My father was trying on the tracksuit when we heard a huge noise. Out of curiosity, I said, "I'll just go and have a look."
The devastation continues as the mudslide follows the quickest route down the mountain. Entire buildings, streets, and forests are wiped out. 12:25 and 44 seconds. The ancient bridge that has stood for 10 centuries is almost completely destroyed. Finally, 40 seconds later, it's over. The mud crashes into the valley floor, where at last it loses momentum and flows into the Stava River. The catastrophe lasts just 3.5 minutes, but it leaves more than 3 miles of chaos in its wake. The beautiful Stava Valley has been reduced to a wasteland. Clemente de Florian narrowly escapes the mudslide by running uphill.
I stopped and turned around. There was nothing left. Absolute silence. Not even a bird or a fly. Nothing.
Their van is totally wrecked, submerged in mud more than 160 feet from where they left it. Clemente frantically searches for his brother and father.
I heard my brother's voice calling me, and I just saw his face sticking out of the mud.
I couldn't move because I was completely covered in mud. Then I saw my brother and called out to him.
So I started to scrape some of the mud off him, and he immediately said, "Where's Dad?"
Meanwhile, about 300 feet away, local sculptor Giuseppe Mick sees the destruction from his workshop window and races to the scene. He's one of the first rescuers to get there.
I saw a figure, a human figure lying, hugging a tree. When it spoke, I went closer. I recognized by the voice that it was Alma Trete.
The force of the mudslide catapults Alma over her first-floor balcony, and Giuseppe finds her nearly 1,000 feet from where her home used to be.
I had no idea where I was. I could just feel grass below me, and I didn't know what was happening.
Giuseppe and his friends make a stretcher out of Alma's jacket. They carry her to safer ground and a waiting ambulance. Lucia Morandini is completely buried in the mud and wreckage of what used to be her father's sports shop. Only a small gap in the debris allows her to breathe and stay alive.
I was scared I would suffocate, or die of thirst, or hunger, a very slow death, and that I would prefer to end it quickly, but I couldn't even do that. I couldn't move at all.
Luckily, people hear Lucia's cries for help and dig her out of the mud. She's rushed to an ambulance and taken to the hospital. 1 p.m. Just half an hour after the accident, local firefighters, Alpine Rescue, and police are on the scene. In all, 7,000 rescuers take part in the recovery operation. A fleet of 19 helicopters and 26 ambulances are on standby, ready to carry survivors to the hospital. Unfortunately, out of the 281 missing, only 13 people are pulled out alive. Umberto De Florian, Lucia Morandini, and Alma Treadle are 3 of those 13. While they're treated for trauma and broken bones, rescuers continue to search through the rubble for their families.
I kept asking after my son, my mother, and my husband. But they wouldn't tell me anything.
89 men, 120 women, and 59 children perish in the mudslide. A total of 268 lives lost. Alma's husband, Stefano, her mother, Maria, and her 4-year-old son, Marco, are among them. Lucia's father, Mario, and Umberto's father, Lucio, also perish. It's one of the worst dam bursts in history. After 3 weeks, the rescue operation is over. The town of Tesero is in shock, and Italy as a whole feels a deep sense of loss. Not 1, but 2 dams have burst, and finding out why is a national priority. What caused the 2 dams to break and unleash 47 million gallons of mud on the Stava Valley? Now we rewind the events of that fateful day and go deep into the investigation to reveal what really happened. Advanced computer simulation will go where no camera can, into the heart of the disaster zone. On the day of the tragedy, the regional court launches an inquiry to determine the exact events leading up to the disaster. The investigation team is complete with mudslide experts. Using their data, we can now piece together the chain of events to find out what really caused this terrible tragedy. The immediate focus is on the 2 dams. What caused them to burst? Early claims are that the trigger was a natural phenomenon. Was one of the worst dam bursts caused by an earthquake?
It was a deafening noise. I got out of my car. The ground was shaking. The car was shaking. It really seemed like there was an earthquake.
Mudslide expert Professor Richard Chandler was a consultant for the accident inquiry.
The foothills of the Alps, where Stava is, are an earthquake area. One can speculate, and one can also rely on evidence from a seismometer in a valley next door to the Stava Valley, which was in place to record possible earthquakes.
There's a seismometer in nearby Cavallese, and investigators study the readings for the exact time that the dam burst, 12:22 p.m. Amazingly, it shows a substantial tremor, followed by another large spike 30 seconds later. The investigation team thinks it's onto something: earthquake activity. They carry out more detailed research. Other seismometers in the region barely register the tremor, if at all. This is highly unusual. It means that the tremors were very localized, too localized to be an earthquake. The dam bursts could not have been caused by an earthquake. Investigators need a new lead. They know that the Southern Alps are an abundant source of minerals. The region is dotted with mines, and the standard practice for exposing a new rock face is to blast it. Could a controlled explosion be what they see on the seismograph? Could that have caused the dams to rupture? Professor Giovanni Tassati was an expert witness at the Stava Valley disaster trial.
There were discussions about the effects of explosions being carried out at nearby mines that could have been transmitted to the area and could have been the trigger of the collapse.
To test this theory, the investigation team tries something unique. They set up controlled explosion in 3 mines within a 3-mile radius of Stava to see if such a blast could have been the culprit. Explosive experts detonate the dynamite. Analyzing the readings, the investigation team is baffled. The explosions barely register on the equipment. These seismographs look nothing like the one recorded on the day of the accident. Whatever caused the 2 Stava tailings dams to burst, it wasn't an underground explosion. So what did cause the 2 seismometer readings 30 seconds apart? Investigators realize that they must have been caused by the dam burst itself. They deduce that the first shock is the upper dam collapsing. The contents of the upper dam pour into the lower dam. Under massive pressure from this huge load, the lower dam also crumbles. Mud, water, and sand explode from the dam and smash into the opposite valley wall, causing the second tremor on the seismograph. Investigators now know how the dams gave way. Their next task is to find out why. If external factors like an earthquake or an explosion were not the trigger, it must have been internal. Something inside one of the dams caused the collapse. And since the upper dam collapsed first, it becomes the new focus of the investigation. Tailings dams are widely used in the mining world. Fluorite production requires massive quantities of water. It makes up 95% of all waste products in the process. A huge machine called a hydrocyclone then separates the sand from the water. Sand builds up into the wall of the dam. The hydrocyclone pumps the water into the center of the dam, creating a reservoir. The safety of the structure relies on the outer wall of the dam, which remains dry and solid, as the liquid in the middle slowly drains out through massive pipes. Tailings dams are effectively self-building. The more waste, the bigger the wall of the dam. The 2 dams at Stava grew from ground level to over 80 feet high in 2 decades, dwarfing the buildings around them. Although not unusual for tailings dams, investigators decide to look into their design. The investigation finds that the mining company has kept detailed records of their upkeep of the 2 dams. They examine them and make a breakthrough. 6 months before the disaster, the mining company suddenly has a problem. In January 1985, a small landslide occurs on the outer wall of the upper dam. This creates a giant hole in the wall, a 65-foot gap for water to leak out. It continues until March, when the mining company makes an emergency repair. In May, they make more repairs and have to drain both the upper and lower dams. The mining company brings them back into operation on the 15th of July, 1985, 4 days before the tragedy. The investigation team focuses heavily on the upper dam. Something strange must have been going on at least 6 months prior, causing it to disintegrate. But what? The team realizes that the answer is all around them. It's everywhere. It's water. With the absence of any external forces, such as an earthquake or underground explosion, the only explanation for the collapse of the dam is through a weakening of the dam's wall, caused by the water inside it.
The moment there is any significant amount of water in the face of the dam itself, then it would immediately become unstable and would collapse. One can do simple experiments on the beach with a bucket and spade and demonstrate when you add water how much less stable wet sand is than dry sand. This is the problem in this particular case.
The small landslide and subsequent hole that appears in the upper dam wall 6 months earlier is proof. Water from inside the reservoir saturates the outer wall, creating the 65-foot hole. 6 months later, the whole wall caves, unleashing a wave of mud that kills 268 people. But the mystery is far from over. Investigators now know that water caused the dam burst. But how did it penetrate the outer wall? What was the final trigger? A dam burst in Italy unleashes more than 66 million gallons of water and mud, which tear through the valley below. 268 people perish. Now, using advanced computer graphics based on accident reports, we go deep into the investigation to unravel the tragic chain of events. The dam burst triggers when 2 tailings dams, huge reservoirs containing wastewater from a mining process, collapse. The investigation team is now certain that the upper dam caved in like a sandcastle. But it's not supposed to work this way. A pipe should drain excess wastewater before it reaches critical volume. Too much water pressure, and the water is forced into the wall, causing it to crumble. Investigators are sure this happened, but how? They start to examine why. They study the meteorological records for the 66 years before the accident and make a fascinating discovery. Maximum rainfall in the Stava Valley occurs between May and August. And 1985 was one of the wettest years on record. Almost 22% more rain fell than normal. It's a good lead for the investigation team, who's sure that the record rainfall played a part in raising the volume of water. But they're not convinced that it's the only contributing factor. They know that the dams must be designed to deal with something as foreseeable as heavy rain, so they look into other reasons for a dramatic rise in water levels. Suddenly, it all seems obvious. Every year, the neighboring ski resort of Latimar attracts thousands of skiers and snowboarders to its snow-capped mountains. The winter before the accident had been a particularly good one for skiing. A thick snow cover grew thicker with regular snow showers. But at the end of the season, something happened that would play a significant part in the disaster only a few months later.
In the spring in the Alps, the snow that fell during the winter melts, and melts relatively rapidly in the course of a few weeks.
Investigators calculate that the water levels produced by the thaw that year were higher than average. Some of this meltwater would flow down the valley, through rivers, streams, and underground springs, into the tailings dams, raising the water level inside. This solves the pressure question. But investigators can't believe that increased rainfall and melting snow alone are responsible for such a catastrophic failure. The first time the upper dam sprung a leak was in January, before the rain and snow could have played a part. Investigators desperately need a new lead. They now concentrate on the heart of the accident, the wrecked dams themselves. The breach in the upper dam wall is clearly visible, but the lower dam and reservoir are totally destroyed. The investigation team calls in heavy machinery to clear the site, and they begin the arduous task of sifting through the ruins of the dams in search of a clue. After searching through 360,000 tons of mud, silt, and rubble in the remains of the upper dam, they find one. It's the drainage pipe, and it's broken. Now they're onto something. They take a closer look at the pipe. Crucially, it shows signs of an earlier repair. A length of the pipe was replaced. But over the years since the repair, the weight of mining waste or tailings placed on top of it has caused it to sag.
Then, with the passage of the years, the tailings built up above this pipe, and the pipe could have pulled out of its end joint, allowing water, which was draining the upper dam, to be discharged into the tailings at a location quite close to the outer face of the dam.
Eventually, it would have pulled free from its anchor points, leaving gaps and rendering the pipe useless. Now, instead of draining water away, it's actually leaking water back into the reservoir, raising the pressure inside and forcing more water to seep through the dam wall, weakening it more and more. But when did the leak from this pipe reach critical levels? Investigators realized that the emergency repairs done just 2 months before the accident are to blame. To carry out the repairs, the mining company had to empty each reservoir. As the water was drained out, the pipe could have bent further out of shape, causing bigger gaps to appear. Then, 3 weeks before the dam bursts, the reservoirs were refilled. 4 days before, mining begins again. Waste tailings are pumped into the dam, but the broken pipe can't drain away excess water. And now rainfall and meltwater are at peak levels. The pressure against the walls from these combined sources of water is too much for the dam to contain, and the water inside the reservoir forces its way out. It takes the path of least resistance, through the outer wall of the dam. Stable only when dry, this wall becomes saturated by the fluid seeping into it.
The stability of the dams at Stava required that the water was kept away from the outer slope of the dam. If any water got anywhere near the outer slope of the dam, it was inherently going to collapse.
Finally, something has to give. The wall of the upper dam collapses, releasing 360,000 tons of sand and water, which surge down the valley, destroying everything. But something still puzzles investigators. They've rarely seen devastation on this scale. It's hard to imagine. 268 people die. 3 hotels, 6 factories, and 53 houses disappear. This solitary tree is all that's left of a dense forest, ripped from the ground by the massive force. Stava Valley is totally destroyed, and investigators are about to discover something very unusual about the mudslide. A catastrophic dam burst in the mountains of northern Italy unleashes 66 million gallons of mud and water, drowning the valley below. As investigators pore over eyewitness testimonies, they begin to realize there's something very unusual about the destructive power of this mudslide.
There were trees and soil flying through the air, even the roof of a house.
It would have been impossible to get out of the whale. The speed of a train or a lorry or something, this devastation was felt all the way down to the small town of Tessero.
What's so unusual about the reports is the speed and violence of the mudslide. From the seismometer readings, investigators calculate that the mudslide reaches an astonishing 56 miles per hour. This is more like a tidal wave. Investigators study similar natural phenomena from around the world. This is actual footage of a mudslide in Russia. Although on a much smaller scale, it's behaving in a very similar way to the dam burst in the Stava Valley, with the speed of water, but the destructive force of mud. Studying records of dam bursts like this one gives investigators the answers they're looking for. They believe they know why the Stava mudslide caused devastation on such a massive scale. But they have to travel back in time to be sure. 210 seconds before disaster, the upper dam's outer wall saturates with water, but it's still solid. Another second, and the dam breaks. The outer wall collapses with such enormous power that it registers higher on the Richter scale than normal earth tremors in this region. This 1950s footage of a real earthquake in Japan shows what happens to the ground when a shock wave is so powerful that the solid earth acts just like a liquid. It's called liquefaction. Liquefaction occurs when water under high pressure enters a solid structure made up of grains, like sand, forcing them apart. They become suspended in the water, making a very dense liquid, almost twice the density of water, but with all its fluid properties. It is exactly what happens when the upper dam collapses in Stava.
As the outer shell disappeared down the slope, the tailings behind no longer had any support, and they become suspended in the water that surrounds them. You finish up with a high concentration of quite heavy particles suspended in the water. So it's like a double density material. And this liquefies, turns into a fluid, and flows down the slope.
Investigators now understand the critical chain of events that caused the catastrophe. "209 seconds. The upper dam is turning to quicksand. The grains have lost their ability to stick together as a solid structure. 198 seconds. This dense liquid is now pouring out of the upper dam and into the lower dam. which is critically overloaded. For 19 seconds, the liquefied mud from both dams collects and grows. As the dams disintegrate, they throw enormous clouds of dust high into the air. It looked like smoke to Umberto, Clemente, and their father Lucio.
It really looked like a fire.
179 seconds left. The lower dam reaches bursting point. It collapses, unleashing the liquefied tailings. 159 seconds. The mud flow strikes the village of Stava, half a mile away, destroying 24 houses and 3 hotels, where 100 tourists are having lunch. They all perish. 99 seconds remain. The mud wave hits the northern reaches of the town of Tesoro. Umberto and Clemente are in their father's van driving up the valley road.
My father didn't waste a second.
He said, "Get out quickly and get up the slope."
Umberto and Clemente escape, but the vicious wave kills their father, Lucio. 79 seconds. The flow reaches the street where Alma Treadle lives and wipes out 17 homes. She hears the roar and goes to the balcony, where she sees the mudslide hurtling down the street.
I didn't have time to say a word before the whole house fell away from under my feet.
As the house collapses, Alma is hurled from the balcony and ends up almost 1,000 feet away. 51 seconds. Lucia Morandini is in the storeroom of her father Mario's sports shop. She hears the rumble of the mudslide and opens the door.
It seemed like a hurricane. There were trees and soil flying through the air. I was hurled back into the storeroom. I had no time to think.
What feels like a hurricane to Lucia is the blast wave that precedes the mudslide all the way down the valley. Powerful enough to destroy buildings and uproot trees, it looks like a whitish cloud made up of fine sand from the tailings dams. An eyewitness in Tesoro took this photo. 40 seconds left. The mudslide slams into the ancient bridge of Tesoro. The wave of mud is so deep that some of it crashes over the 100-foot-high bridge. In just 3.5 minutes, more than 60 million gallons of mud, water, and debris destroy an area of nearly 30 miles. Tailings dams operate all over the world. Are thousands of people at risk? Is the disaster at Stava an isolated incident? Investigators need to find out, so they turn to the maintenance records for the 2 tailings dams. Their search yields shocking results. You're watching Seconds from Disaster. A mining dam collapses in the southern Italian Alps. Now investigators are scouring through maintenance records to find out if the company in charge regularly monitors its stability. In 1974, the municipality of Tesoro ordered Fluormine, the company that owned the mine, to carry out inspections. Results of the tests showed that the slope angle of the upper dam was exceptionally high, and its instability was nearing danger levels.
The engineer who carried out these tests was surprised that they had not collapsed earlier. This should have served as a warning. But nothing was done, the situation was covered up, and work carried on as normal.
This was 10 years before the disaster. The findings prompt the investigation team to dig deeper. They discover a catalog of errors. The soil is completely unsuitable to support the dams, and the ground is too marshy to allow adequate drainage, an essential requirement for their stability. Without proper drainage, the walls can't dry out and become solid or stable. Also, the foundations for the upper dam have been partially laid on the lower dam, which means that the upper dam has been partly built on the wet mud of the lower dam, rather than on solid ground. But most amazing of all is the inadequate repair of the broken pipe in the upper dam. With so many problems, the mining dams were an accident waiting to happen. The investigation team's findings were compelling enough to seek a prosecution, and in 1988 they went to trial. The Stava Valley disaster inquiry took 7 years to complete. In the end, 8 people from the 5 companies that ran the mine since the building of the upper dam and 2 members of the regional council in charge of mine safety were found guilty of culpable disaster and multiple manslaughter. They were all given prison sentences, and the magistrate noted in his ruling that if 1/10 of the money spent on the trial had been invested in the safety of the tailings dams, the accident would not have taken place. Today, Alma Treadle has to live with the loss of her 4-year-old son Marco, her husband Stefano, and her mother Maria. She almost died herself, yet she no longer feels resentment towards the people responsible.
I don't think it's up to me to judge these men. I'm not even going to start. I know I used to feel angry because I thought you had the duty to make safety checks and you didn't do them. Otherwise this wouldn't have happened. But, you know, feeling resentment for the rest of your life towards these people, you just end up feeling bad yourself. So I said to God, I leave them to you. I leave them in your hands.
After the disaster, Clemente de Florian took over his father's carpentry business. His brother Umberto, transformed by the events of the trial surrounding the disaster, became a lawyer. After recovering in the hospital, Lucia Morandini eventually took over her father's sports shop and has since expanded the business, opening 5 new shops in neighboring towns. She now has a 9-year-old son, Igor. 17 years after the tragedy, Graziano Lucchi, who lost his parents, co-founded the Stava Foundation as a reminder of what happened on July 19, 1985.
It's important for people to know what happened. We especially want people to know the causes, who is responsible for this tragedy, because only this knowledge will allow us to try to avoid other similar tragedies from happening elsewhere.
But the warnings have not been heeded. Although the safety laws surrounding tailings dams were improved in Italy, lessons are still to be learned elsewhere in the aftermath of the Stava trial. Since 1985, there have been no fewer than 33 similar accidents worldwide, 8 of them occurring in the United States. In Stava, the mine never reopened after the tragedy, but following extensive restoration, the valley has regained its former beauty. The tourists have come back, and the locals have helped each other rebuild their community and return to a peaceful, idyllic way of life.